will be very ably represented. Now, for this conversation, as we are saying, we're going to have a lot on policy. There's a task force that was established by the Ministry of Roads and Transport on looking at e-mobility. It's represented in the room today by the Vice Chair, Ms. Cherotich. Are you in the room? Okay, so for interest of gender, I'm making this executive decision right now. Now we are going to have a conversation and we'll hear from the task force. We'll be asking questions to the task force, to Ms. Cherotich. This is looking at what's been happening in the country over the last 1 year since we were here, Bona PS. In your remarks by the Cabinet Secretary, there's been mention of what has happened. For example, the Energy and Petroleum Regulatory Authority came up with the charging and battery swapping regulations. They're already in effect. We have seen a lot that's being done in terms of incentives to the private sector. Anybody who would like to get into this particular practice, various tax incentives. And I want to just hear, from the rollout of the regulations on charging and battery swapping and everything else that you've seen, what is the government seeing going forward in terms of encouraging and spurring more uptake of e-mobility in the country?
Thank you, Latif, for that question. Indeed, one, and I did mention that in the speech, that we have a challenge in terms of our power consumption during the day and during the night. When you look at this point, at this hour, we are probably now hitting the morning peak. You will find that we are now averaging around 1,600 megawatts. Then we'll move to around 8 p.m. when we may hit maybe towards 2150 megawatts as the country's peak. Then as the country goes to sleep from 10, we may drop that power consumption to a low of 1,200 megawatts, meaning there is a huge disparity in terms of the peak and the lowest demand. So to bridge this gap, one of the areas that we as a government have seen as a low-hanging fruit is to incentivize and create an enabling environment so that we can have the private sector come into this space by ensuring that we do have enough charging points, ensuring that we get now what we call a charging tariff, for example. We have put into the regulations of battery swapping. The reason why we are doing that is to ensure that, and if you look at the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, we are talking of the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. And one of the areas is to ensure, and you did hear the president did commit towards having at least 100,000 motorbikes be converted from using fossil fuel to using e-mobility. There is no better way of incentivizing this and making this into action than ensuring that, one, we do have the regulations, we do have a tariff, and we do have power available throughout to ensure that this is made possible. And then also we are working with development partners to ensure that we also increase awareness. And this is one of the forums that is meant to increase awareness to Kenyans and to alert them of what is coming and the benefits of embracing the e-mobility. So we have a lot that we are doing as a sector. Thank you.
Thank you, PS. Rajal, I want to come to you as the CFO of Rome. I know that Rome, you're really involved in the two-wheeler mobility, electric mobility. So the things that the PS has said, what the government is doing, we have the regulations on batteries charging and swapping. We have a tariff that's supposed to be helping on this, the e-mobility tariff. 8 bob off-peak, 16 bob at peak time. Is this working for you as a company, as a player in this sector? That way, yes, it works.
Thank you, Latif. Two things. Yes, Rome designs and manufactures electric vehicles, both motorbikes and buses for the Kenyan market. The support that we receive from the Kenyan government and from Kenya Power, KPLC, is very appreciated. and the numbers speak for themselves, right? We saw, since the fiscal incentives came in, since the e-mobility tariff came in from mid last year, we saw a massive increase in the supply and demand of electric vehicles in the country. There is yet significantly more to be done on that and more to come on that, and the tariffs help. We would love for those tariffs to also be extended more broadly. So for example, you asked about Rome. I'll speak specifically to Rome's situation. Rome is one of the guiding ethos at Rome is to give a lot of flexibility and power to the consumer. So from our charging perspective, we give the power to charge the batteries for the electric vehicles, for the electric motorcycles, to our end consumer. So not just coming to us and using our public charging infrastructure, our equivalent of the swap systems, but actually giving consumers the ability to power up their vehicles at home. And if there's some way we can together put our collective wisdom and mind power in this room and try and extend those benefits, both indirectly, as we already have done through what we offer, but also directly to the end consumer to enable more charging, and what that effectively does, more charging at home and more flexibility on that, what that effectively does, Latif, Honorable PS, is it reduces even further the end cost for the consumer and accelerates the uptake.
It's a good challenge, and that's one of the things that we'll be discussing throughout this conference. And then how can we extend this? And PS, maybe if you have some thoughts, we'll come back to you shortly on how can we extend this to the end user. If you're charging at home, how can you then benefit from this e-mobility tariff? But let's bring in the Jet from Basigo. You have a number of buses, Jet, a number of buses that you charge, like the PS said. You charge them, you release them back into the market. But looking back at the incentives, and I just want to read out some of these incentives, exemption of excise duty on EV motorbikes, VAT exemption on EV and excise duty as well for locally assembled bikes. Then there's excise and VAT exemption on EV batteries. There is a corporate tax of 15% for the completely or semi-knocked down vehicles. This one on the batteries, because you're very big on batteries, your buses drive around with huge batteries. Are you enjoying these benefits? Or are there challenges? And also, how can we overcome those challenges, if there are?
So before I talk about challenges, though, I hope that the theme that everybody is getting from this morning, I remember speaking at this conference 1 year ago, and what we were talking about was the promise of the EV industry. There was so much opportunity, so much potential impact for the country. And what you're hopefully hearing now is that the industry, in partnership with Kenya Power, with EPRA, with the ministry, is starting to deliver on that promise. And that is what is so exciting. So yes, we have 21 buses in operation. Those buses are consuming 60 megawatt hours of Kenya Power electricity. And the best part is, for buses, as we know, our matatus, they run during the day, so they can only charge at night. We can only charge during off-peak demand stimulation. That is what we were talking about at this conference last year. Not just that, in May of last year, we welcomed Dr. Engineer Saror to come launch one of our DC charging depots in Buruburu. What was special about that launch? That was the first depot connected to the e-mobility tariff, which is what enables this sector. These 21 buses, this tiny fraction of buses, because of Kenya's leading position in renewable energy, is mitigating 80 tons of CO2 every single month. 80 tons. That's greater marginal impact on CO2 emissions than an electric bus almost anywhere else in the world. This industry is delivering on the promise, and it has been enabled by what has happened with Kenya Power and EPRA through the e-mobility tariff and the support we received in the Finance Act of 2023 from the government. Now, to your question of challenges, because while we're delivering on the promise, we have a long road ahead. One thing that's very important to remember is that all the companies that are working in the private sector of this industry are still startup companies. Most of us are still pre-profitability. We are financed by venture capital and private equity. And when we think about how this industry is going to grow, it requires foreign direct investment from commercial investors. And so much of what we are asking for from policymakers and from government support is to lay that foundation for us to drive that investment in. Because of the climate impact of what our industry can achieve, we are a prime target for climate finance. supporting the growth of the e-mobility industry in Kenya. Like you said, we can be a lighthouse for so many other countries. We can make Kenya basically a leader overall in this sector. And so many of the policies you've heard proposed by the E-Mobility Association of Kenya are to just further enhance and support that foundation. In the four-wheel segment, the one thing that's very important to remember is that we have an industrial policy that really incentivizes local assembly. Okay, so we're a bit different from the two-wheel industry. We really incentivize local assembly. If you are locally assembling a four-wheel vehicle, a car, a bus, a truck, you pay 0% import duty, 0% excise tax if you locally assemble from CKD. We were so proud last week as Basigo, in partnership with the Cabinet Secretary of Investments, Trade and Industry, Rebecca Miano, to launch the first dedicated electric bus assembly line here in Kenya at Kenya Vehicle Manufacturers in Thika. Why is this important? Because it's much more than just CO2 emissions. It's much more than just reducing imports of fossil fuels. We're talking about a new green manufacturing industry that we are building across two-wheelers and four-wheelers here in Kenya. And so much of the policy that's in place is going to help support that.
Jit, I love your optimism, and it's a very good thing. Let's clap for that, because it's looking forward and saying, don't be shy to say when it's working. So back to my question. What are the challenges?
So, what are the challenges? I think the main challenge that we're talking about, it all goes back to the fact that we are still startup companies. And if you look at 2023 in the startup company space, venture capital and private equity was very difficult to come by. I think everybody was facing real challenges around raising equity capital in order to be able to support our growth. That is slowly starting to be resolved. So that's the good news, and that's not necessarily a challenge that government can do too much about. But one thing that I think, there's 2 points that I would make that policy and partnership with Kenya Power can really support. So number one, in our industry of e-mobility, the fundamental problem is, compared to internal combustion engines, our upfront cost is much higher for the asset, but our operating cost is much lower, because of the difference in cost between electricity and diesel fuel. That is common regardless of the vehicle type. Okay? As a result, in order for our industry to compete, innovative financing models are at the core of almost everybody's business model, whether it's battery swapping for two-wheelers, or leasing or battery leasing in the case of buses, things like this. When we talk about VAT exemptions, they are great, but we need them to extend into these alternative models, like the battery swapping, like the vehicle leasing. Otherwise, it doesn't have as much impact as we think it might have on a pure sale. So that's number one. Number two, this is a capital-intensive industry. And a big part of that capital intensity is around charging. We all know this, okay? Right now, in the way that the ecosystem is set up, so much of the investment that goes into charging, if you're a private sector startup company, actually is coming from us. So we work with Kenya Power, but we're the ones who are paying for the transformer upgrades, for the connection, all of this, in order to be able to get the 1 MVA worth of power coming to our site. As a startup company, that's all the more capital I need to raise, and we will be gated how quickly we can grow as long as we have to do that. The more support we can get from government, from Kenya Power, in sharing that cost up to the meter. Beyond the meter, that's our responsibility.
Right.
But everything that they can do up to the meter, that further helps enhance how quickly we can grow. Because all of us want to grow faster. Our customers want us to grow faster. The government wants us to grow faster.
Thank you very much. And I know PS and MD will respond to this. Michael, as GIZ, first of all, let's clap for GIZ again, because they have co-sponsored this year's convention again. You've got a lot of experience, not only supporting industry and government in Kenya, but also in other parts of the world. What is it that you see that has worked in other parts of the world? So, for example, you talk about policy regulatory framework in place, the private sector and the private sector involvement, and also the end consumer uptake of electric mobility. What are you seeing out there?
First of all, thanks. Thanks also for the clap. Morning from my side. And also, we are proud of this collaboration with KPRC. Thanks, Mr. So. And happy to be on stage for the first time this year. So looking at the figures again, I guess you might be tired of the figures already. Last year, 11 million four-wheelers, electric four-wheelers have been sold. It's 15% market share globally. Two-wheelers is even more impressive, 36 million have been sold. It's a market share of roughly 4% only. Germany, where do we stand? The fleet is like 2.5 million electric cars, including plug-in hybrid vehicles. That means like in 2023, there was like a market share of 25%. How did we get there? There was, first of all, like direct purchase incentives for end consumers, and also like corporates for cars and buses. There is a zero emission vehicle quota at EU level, and also like on a German level, of course, and also like public procurement quotas. That helped a lot to increase the fleet. And also there is funding for charging infrastructure, both at European level and German level. There are also like quota just came into effect. There is a regulation on this now at EU level. And of course there is funding for R&D projects. But now, like all of a sudden, like German government is facing budget issues, and there is a sharp decline on funding matters. And learning, as you were asking for other experiences. I mean, like for the Kenyan context, it's all about affordability, right? There is like, as it has been mentioned by Jit and the others, there is like high upfront costs for electric vehicle. How to translate this into like financing mechanisms for the end consumers, may it be bus operators, may it be the guys on the road who want to get their electric motor as cheap as possible. For me, it's all about looking at the investments, like to attract investments as Kenya. Keep listening to the industry. It's all about reliability, predictability of the policy framework. I'm very much happy that the Vice Chair, George Say, is here with us today. They're listening to the industry. Please keep on listening to them. It's all about creating now a reliable framework, like looking at tax incentives, looking also like setting up charging infrastructure which is needed. Like there is like these range anxiety and issues.
Right, thank you very much, Michael. Raj, I want to come to you, and then PS, you'll respond to these issues. Mainly what I'm hearing is this is a capital-intensive business for the private sector to get into. And the private sector would like the government to come in and offer support. Okay, that's on the one side of what the government can do to support you. In terms of consumer awareness, are you finding challenges because you're selling to the mass market? Are you finding it easy to actually sell this car that doesn't produce a sound?
Thank you, Latif. Two points on that. Firstly, let me echo and magnify what Jit said, both about exactly what you said, capital need. We are a startup ecosystem. We need millions of dollars of capital. I can go as far as to say, if companies in the US, in the Northern world, in other markets achieved half as much as our peers and ourselves have achieved, they would find it significantly easier to raise capital than we do. So we do need that. Secondly, a big echo and magnification on not just being, Honorable PS, not just being a lighthouse for being the transition, for the end result, for being the transition into e-mobility and clean transportation, but we have a unique opportunity in Kenya to also be a lighthouse for how we go about doing that. So adding more and more value locally into our markets is extremely important. How do we encourage local assembly? How do we go even further to encourage local manufacturing, creating green jobs, right, which is what we're all about as well. Coming specifically to your question on how do we increase the adaptability of the vehicles, I think it's two things. Firstly, is the product has to work, right? Our electric border drivers are intensive use case borders. We've all seen them with cattle on the back, gunyas of cement, potatoes. The motor vehicle that we're developing has to work for the use case that we're developing it for. It's very important at Rome that we've developed a product on the ground for the market that we're serving. We have to respect the consumer sufficiently enough to develop the right product for it. So that's the first hurdle. Everything else is secondary. If the product doesn't work, you're not going to get the adaptability, because we have to remember we have a unique position in Kenya, in a lot of sub-Saharan Africa, where these vehicles, motorcycles in particular, are used as a productive asset. They used to generate daily income for the end user and not to commute from home to work. Which leads me nicely to my second point, is they have to be affordable, right? our end border drivers are not going to get into an electric motorcycle because it's good for the environment, because it's good for the health, because it's good for energy offtake. We care about that, but they care about increasing the bottom line into their pocket. If they can increase their livelihood, they will adopt faster. So how do we make it more affordable? By product innovation, by financial innovation, and by getting the product to the end consumer at the right price. I'm really, really pleased to say that any border driver today who converts from a petrol vehicle, from a petrol motorcycle to an electric motorcycle, will save anywhere from 35 to 75% on daily operating costs. And from day one, they can start making money.
Okay, that's all said very well, but is that what they're saying on the ground?
So we need to,
So if that was the case, so if you saw that the next border guy is actually making more money,
yeah,
the next thing you do is just go and get an electric border.
It's a great pushback. Thank you, Latif. Very great pushback. We're at the start of what could hopefully be a virtuous cycle, right? So as the border drivers see more and more of their contemporaries using electric vehicles, they ask, each time I order an Uber Eats or a Bolt Eats or whatever, I ask the border driver, why aren't you using an electric vehicle? And today, access to information is a hurdle. Today, having comfort that the product works, it carries what it needs to, there's range anxiety. So having more swap stations, having more charging stations located across Nairobi helps alleviate this. So there's an information barrier and there is a knowledge barrier. And this virtuous cycle, I think we're right at the bottom where we'll see a massive uptake in the near future with support from the government, with support from Kenya Power, with support from investors. But the more you see this on the road, the more curiosity this enables and the more you look at adopting it.
Well, thank you very much. Well said. Jit, you want to add something?
Yeah, I want to add about demand from the other side of this, which is from matatu owners.
Yes.
Okay. So as we know, one of the greatest impacts on the economy has been what's happened with fuel prices since January of 2022. And this has had a devastating effect on profitability for your average diesel matatu owner. Right now, Basigo has over 500 deposits for electric buses here in Nairobi. We'd have more, except we stopped at 500. The only reason for this, exactly like my colleague just said, it's not because they necessarily want to go green. It is because right now the electric bus is more profitable for them. It is a better return on investment. And that's what makes this case so compelling here in Kenya, is that improved economic outlook, the higher return on investment. That's what's driving demand in this market.
Oh, thank you very much. Coming to you, PS. I remember when the president spoke during Mashujaa Day celebration, he said, we are going to have electric bodabodas across the country, and people laughed and the memes went round. And I hosted on KTN News Moses Nderito from Basigo and others who came in with the motorbikes, and we actually had a demonstration in the studio. Because the question was, why are people looking at this and just saying, right? Why is there such low believability that this is actually something that's doable? But now, to your question, PS, how would you respond to the issues that the industry is saying? If we can get more and more incentives, we can get more and more support from government, from Kenya Power, we can actually help even lower the costs.
Let me start with the first question that you did raise, and the previous speakers have alluded to that. And from where I sit, I reflect back in the 1990s when we had automatic vehicles. We had people who were very apprehensive towards driving a car that is, has an automatic gearbox, because we are used to using the manual cars. And you would hear all manner of theories as to how an automatic car is not as efficient as a manual car. Today, 90% of the vehicles that are on the road, other than trucks, are automatic. So what am I saying? I'm saying the human being is, one, apprehensive to change, and they always frustrate change. The only thing that the human being forgets is that there is nothing as permanent in this world as change itself. So what we are lacking, and no, this JIT, Rajal. Rajal did actually say that for motorbikes, electric motorbikes, you stand to save up to 70% of your operation costs when you're using the e-bike than the fossil fuel bike. So what is the challenge? Where is the gap? The gap, number one, is on access to information, and that is why we need to amplify this information and echo what the president is saying, because the president has actually seen that these people who came out to vote for him, these people who are wearing his T-shirts and moving around campaigning for him, the easiest way he can help them get what we used to call pesa mfukoni is by saving their operational cost. And so therefore, you put into the rules of battery charging and battery swapping. So what we need now is to increase the awareness, amplify the sound, and ensure that we have more uptake. However, there is a bottleneck that has come in, and that is in terms of financing, because all these people, for them to transit, they need financing for them to move their motorbikes. So we need DFIs to come into place, commercial banks to come into place, and help our border riders transit. That is one. Two, JIT did mention about the costs, the infrastructure costs, and he did allude that you need, as an investor, to be left at the point of the meter moving forward. From the meter backwards should be KPLC, KTRACO, and EPC, ETC. That has thrown me back because somebody somewhere has to take care of this cost of this transformer, this cable that has brought, this pole that has brought power into your premises. So what does that mean? It got me thinking that probably of all the products that we are having, and I'm happy that we have the MD KPLC and the chair, of all the products that we are having, probably we need to think further. How do we access climate financing in terms of a grant such that should we have an investor who wants to put up the charging points, who wants to put up a manufacturing plant, how do we finance that transformer to that person at a lower cost without asking that person to fund? And so therefore we must think of a product, and I'm happy I'm seeing, I've seen KFWGZ here. We need to have a product and access to a DFI on climate financing such that KPLC, once you get that request, you can be able to tap into that source. The way we have funding for last mile, the way we have funding for special economic zones and what have you, we need now to create a product that will help us now bridge the gap in what JIT has raised. Lastly, is what you have raised in regard to the consumer. And the more we increase uptake, the off-peak power demand, the lower our cost. Remember, we have the 2019 Energy Act that stipulates that every 3 years we must review our tariffs. And so therefore the next review of our tariffs should be in the year 2026. That is 2 years from now, less than probably 18 months or 20 months from now. So when we do review, because of such workshops and kind of feedback that we are getting, we need now to think of how do we have a tariff, not necessarily a time of use tariff, but a tariff that will ensure that you at home, you do benefit from a lower cost when you're charging your vehicle at night, because you're also helping the country. Because currently what we are having, for example, in geothermal, we have a lot of venting in geothermal because of the low uptake of power during the night. So because you'll be helping us stop the venting in geothermal, then we also probably will need to develop a tariff that will be favorable to you so that we increase the uptake. I think that is it from my end. Thank you.
Asante sana, PS. I want to come to the audience and take a couple of questions from you. I'm going to have Rita and Sam helping me move the mic around, but I want to throw in the first question to the audience, and this is to a member of the audience, the Vice Chair of the National Electric Mobility Policy Strategy Task Force, Cherotich. Chero, you have a job to do, which is to develop this framework to come back and advise the government this is the route from what the stakeholders, what the public is saying, is this is the way to go. This is the kind of policy framework that we need. This is the legislative framework that we need, the regulations that need to be in place for increased uptake. Where are we on this? The mic will come to you. The mic guys, if they're in the room. Here at the front. Jero, if you don't mind, just come here. I'll give you this one.
Thanks very much. It's wonderful to be here today. I'll stand on all protocol already observed. My name is Cherotich Sei. I'm the Vice Chair of the E-Mobility Task Force. And I'm really happy to have some of the members of the task force here. Hezbollah, of course, who spoke, Abdullahi, Ignatius, who will be presenting at some point later on today. And the rest of the E-Mobility Task Force is following this virtually, including our chair, who cannot be physically present with us today. It's really good to hear from all of you, and I think that as the E-Mobility Task Force that has been in place for about 8 months now, we have about a month left before we wrap up and hand over the policy to the CS Ministry of Transport, where we are housed, where we have been working out of, also with great support from GIZ. Thank you very much for that. I would like to say that our journey has been one where we are heavily invested in the process of public participation. Not only are we here to establish very clear policy objectives, the critical issues, and also the measures that will be put in place in this policy, we want to hear from the Kenyans. And listening to the business case that you're making and saying, in actual fact, and how many buses, how many deposits do you have for buses now? 500. We have just concluded a week-long exercise, which actually started several months ago, but came to fruition about beginning of last week, where we have been in Garissa, Isiolo, Nyeri, Nakuru, Eldoret, Kisumu, Nairobi, and Mombasa, engaging with members of the public, because one of the critical things we need to have is buy-in from members of the public. It's all well and good to throw out statistics. It's all well and good to say this is where we want to go. And for the most part, climate change is not the #1 priority. The #1 priority ni pesa mfukoni. And this is why, at the end of the day, we need to have these conversations with Kenyans, those who we expect to adopt electric vehicles over the next 20 to 30 years. We need to have them fully invested. And some of the feedback we received is indeed this issue of awareness. They say, we have no idea. We're not fully involved, we're not fully informed, and they had all kinds of interesting questions, special interest groups, persons with disability who said, where are we in the socioeconomic measures? How are we going to benefit from this? Others asked questions, for example, how do we regularize the tariffs that will be charged by the electric vehicle companies, so that if I go to an ampersand swap station or an Arkwright or a Rome swap station, how do I know that what I'm being charged by Arkwright is similar to what Rome is charging and is similar to what ampersand will be charging, and so on and so forth. So they asked all kinds of critical questions. And then, of course, the issue of R&D, torque, how powerful is this bike actually? As you said, if it's gunias, it's goats, it's all kinds of things, how are we sure that these electric two-wheelers can go up the hill? But that said, when we come to issues of the bus, I'm really, really pleased, because when we visited with Moses, when we did some local benchmarking in Nairobi and went out to Thika, to the KMV, we saw the action behind the assembly of these buses, and it is absolutely impressive, phenomenal. We actually rode around Nairobi in these buses, and we say this is the way to go, and the profitability is definitely there. But at the end of the day, we're looking at issues of financing. And this is what the border riders are saying. This is what the matatu operators are saying. And if you'll permit me, just for a second, Eric, sorry. I might actually sit down.
No, come up here.
No, it's okay. It's fine. I don't stand on too much ceremony. Don't worry. Okay, this is much better. Thank you. Well, I need to turn it off. Okay, so as I have mentioned, as the e-mobility policy team, ours is to come up with a comprehensive policy that responds both to the industry and the end users of these electric vehicles. And when I look at policy measures that we have in place, what has come out quite clearly now is issues of fiscal and non-fiscal incentives. And this is an area where we are taking on board every single comment that is coming from all stakeholders, so that we see, are we zero rating? When we look at electricity tariffs, Engineer Sirori, you're here, one of the things that if we can get as many people as possible, if you look at bus depots doing their charging in the night, so they take advantage of the 8 shillings as opposed to the base, which is 16 shillings. How do we get to create an infrastructure that allows depots to be established and where charging takes place in the night? The zero rating that comes in, the tax incentives for those, and indeed we want to ring fence to the extent possible in this policy the startups that have done the heavy lifting, that have been here since 2017, 2018, doing the work, proving the concept, making it clear that it is viable to go the electric way. How do we ensure that we don't have a stampede of new arrivals who want to bring in imported electric vehicles without having done the requisite groundwork and R&D to ensure that they are fit for purpose? How do we make sure that those who have already done the heavy lifting have access to tax incentives? Then there's other areas such as enhancing local, this is quite important, enhancing local technical capacity and skills across the e-mobility value chain. This is also what will create, generate, and spur on employment. There's a policy objective to also enhance the e-mobility infrastructural capacity to accelerate the adoption of electric vehicles. We also want to look at promoting local manufacturing and assembly of EVs. This is something that we've just talked about. And overall, an integrated, comprehensive policy, legal, and regulatory framework. When we look at issues of getting more women, persons with disabilities, special interest groups involved, we want to scale up the socioeconomic measures to promote the adoption of EVs. Now, as I'm not going to say too much more, because next to all of these policy objectives are intense and detailed policy measures, which will finally appear in the policy document. And what we want to encourage as we're coming to the end of our process as the e-mobility task force is that if there are any comments still pending, because we have been extremely keen on the issue of public participation. We do not want this to be a policy document that ends up on some shelf somewhere, gathering dust, and we are trying to force electric vehicle mobility down the throats of Kenyans, and Kenyans don't know what we're talking about, and they're actually not interested. And so this type of work that we have been engaged in as the task force is to ensure that by the time we launch this policy, which of course will have to go hand in hand with the regulatory framework, the laws, everything that will go hand in hand with it. We want to have made sure that as many Kenyans as possible are aware and have provided their input. So we encourage you, and I think next week, Engineer Siror and Chairman of the board of KPLC, we will be calling upon, again, specific special interest groups, be it EPRA, KPLC, to sit with us and go through this policy document and let us know if there's anything that we have missed. And as a funny anecdote, when we first started engaging with the public to collect data and to collect their views, when we finished our presentation, they said, you're working for KPLC, we can see. That's what they thought. They thought that we were here to make a case for KPLC and to utilize KPLC's approaches. So there's also some sensitivities there, because Kenyans in general tend to be quite suspicious, and they say, what agenda are we pushing? And we have to remind Kenyans that we are pushing an agenda for them. And the lower you can push down the tariff, the higher the uptake will be. More so when we look at interoperability, when we look at people being able to charge from their homes and different places, we want to be able to make a case that actually you're making great savings, more so if you charge in the night. So this is a little bit like, in a nutshell, the journey of the task force. We will be done in a month, but this is just only the beginning, the awareness raising, the incentives that will come hand in hand with the measures going forward. Some of the things we look forward to, and I can only wish everybody in the electric vehicle mobility sector all the best, and this is fantastic because we are also being responsive to the global dynamics around climate change. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Let's clap for Chero and the big nutshell that she's given us. I want to now move the mic around. Look for the hand, and then you can pass on the mic. There's a hand up there. You can stand up, the gentleman in glasses. As you do that, I also have been alerted to recognize the presence here with us of Tasha Bailey. Tasha is from FCDO. We also have Anika Berlin from UNEP, and we also have Jafeth Kipkirui from WRI. Asanteni sana for being here with us. All right, so got the mic?
Yes.
All right, tell us your name and the question.
Thank you. My name's Tom Morton, and I've been involved in the carbon market for many years. And I'm also an EV owner. I think I was one of the 30 in one of the previous years on the early graphs we saw. And I'd like to thank everyone for their engagement in this really important sector. I'm also involved in writing the carbon documentation for an electric motorbike company here. And one of the key things that we as an industry need is a renewal of something called the grid emissions factor. Now, for those of you who have not heard of that before, it's a very precise calculation that is, the rules are set out by the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and it looks at the amount of CO2 on average that comes from the grid. And the reason that's important is that there is some CO2 in the grid because we do still use a little bit of oil power. But we haven't built any oil generation facilities for many years. And the factor is a balance of how we're generating power now and what we're building. In short, this figure needs updating for carbon finance, climate finance in this sector to move forward.
Okay.
And in order to do that, we need what's called the dispatch data from Kenya Power and from EPRA. And that is exactly how much power is dispatched from each power station in Kenya every half an hour for the entire year, okay? Once we have that data, the industry can do a calculation, working together, to work out how much CO2 is actually saved by electric vehicles. And so, as the PS is here, as GIZ is here, who funded this work in the past, as Kenya Power is here, as EPRA is here, as the industry is here, and as the task force is here, as a takeaway, please, please, can we have high-level engagement on getting the grid emissions factor renewed?
You, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. Another hand. Cross to this side.
Thank you very much. My name is Abdul Ghani Jama. I'm the Managing Director of Apex e-Mobility. My question is two things. Number one, I see two-wheeler and four-wheeler here, but there is a missing link. That is a three-wheeler. Maybe there's an empty seat for that. That's number one. It has to be included in order to promote inclusion. Secondly, those who have a first move advantage will need to set the scene in terms of standardization. And that is what is missing. If I bring my own charger, another one for another, maybe 10 different chargers, we are promoting at different standards. Therefore, what is your policy with respect to standardization? That is very important for this industry. We have seen Some example is some of the developed world, but we haven't seen here. Perhaps we may have a Tesla of Kenya model, whereby they will set the scene in terms of a standard. We don't want to see that.
Right.
We don't want any company driving the standard. We want a standard set by the government and take into account the policy setting when it comes to this industry. Therefore, I think let's put into the equation now for the three-wheeler, number one, and number two, what is your policy with respect to standardization? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jama. I want us to take those two questions first, and I'll start with you. I mean, there's what's been said on particularly standardization, and I saw you nodding because it's something that you related with. So what's the experience? How do we go about standardizing the charges?
Okay, thanks for the question as well. Yeah, standardization is an issue that I also face here. If I would own an electric vehicle, an electric two-wheeler, I was really wondering how to go beyond Nairobi. And looking at the national, at the expansion of the charging infrastructure, I would find it challenging if all the individual companies need to set up their own swapping stations for two-wheelers. So we're actually looking into this with through our Siemens Foundation. There will be an R&D project coming soon on the interoperability of charging technology for two-wheelers. So we're going to look into this. It's an issue. Robert from CAPS is also here. He can also be going to kick off the work on charging, the standards work on charging infrastructures in a couple of days. So he could also get more into detail on this one. But it's an important issue to look at the standardization, especially on two-wheelers.
Okay. Robert, you in the room? Yes. Robert, please give us an update on that, on what CAPSA is doing in terms of just looking into standardization of charging.
Thank you. My name is Robert. Actually, I do have a presentation at 2 on the same, but quick one. So yes, in the standardization scene, we've done a lot. One of the gap areas is charging infrastructure, which actually we are in the process of finalizing. However, we do admit that there are challenges, especially in the electric 2- and 3-wheeler space, because ideally it's battery swapping technology, which all over the world, no country has been able to standardize that particular sector. But in terms of the electric vehicle, that is the 4-wheeler space, the electric buses, the chargers that are being used, that is an area where it's a quick win and an easy win, and we are in the process of actually developing the standards. So let's say in the next 2 or 3 months, we should have that finalized. Thank you.
Thank you very much. P.S., a couple of issues for you to respond to here. You can hear already that at least the private sector, with the support from GIZ and others, are already working on thinking on standardization. But then what else is being done from a government level? And there was a question by Tom on the grid emission factor.
Thank you, Latif. Indeed, this is a very interactive session, and from the audience, you can really see the kind of interest that we do have on this topic. Let me start on grid emissions factor. It is something that we are going to take up as soon as we leave here with the MDK PLC. I'm also going to take it up with EPRA, because that is data that is available. In fact, that data, month on month, helps us in tabulating your power bill. So it's not something that you're asking that is out of the blues. Is something that can be easily available. Actually, it is available. It's just an issue of updating. The issue on standardization, we have what we call the whole government approach. And that is why this is something that requires the Ministry of Energy, Ministry of Transport and Roads and Transport, Ministry of Trade and Industry and Investment Promotion, which is tasked with the KEBS, that is the Kenya Bureau of Standards, And in CABES, that's where now the standardization and everything comes into place. So what we are having now is the stakeholder session, and you have heard that the standardization is coming in. For us, it's just to ensure that we put the rules in place and also enforce. Once we standardize, we enforce that that is being carried on. And I'm sure we're going to ensure that is done. Thank you.
Asante sana PS. Let's clap for the PS and my panel. I want to conclude here. What we've done this morning, as you've seen, is set the stage for these 2 days of conversations, right? You have a lot of engagement. You've got presentations coming up in the afternoon from various actors. You have also, like the PS has said, it's a whole of government approach. We've got the other ministries also that will be represented. KEBS will be making a presentation. There'll be very many conversations. If you want to know what conversations those are, please look at the wall. You see on the columns, the pillars, you have the QR codes. Scan that QR code. You'll have the entire program for the 2 days. Ladies and gentlemen, please let's clap for the PS, Alex Oshira from the State Department for Energy. We've got one final closing remark.
Closing remark. And my closing remark is basically, when you look at Africa, in terms of the presence and the contribution towards the global carbon emission footprint, we have contributed the least. But in terms of the suffering that in which Africa is having, we have suffered the most. We have a fast mover advantage, ladies and gentlemen. For example, in Kenya, we have a grid that is 93% green. The government, through Vision 2030, we anticipate and we are driving towards having a green grid by the year 2030. Because of the fast mover advantage, we must join hands, both government and private sector, to help the world decarbonize because of the suffering that we have had. Thank you.
Asante sana. So now let's clap now for the PS, Alex Oshira, State Department for Energy. Jit Bhattacharya is the co-founder and CEO of Basigo. Also clap for him. Rajal Upadhyaya, the CFO at Rome, and Michael Schuster, Program Director at GIZ. It's time for us to have some tea, water, coffee, chai, and whatever you fancy. It's a bathroom break. And then we converge here in exactly 15 minutes for our next session.